Welcome, everyone, to today's program, sponsored by the Plant Initiative, Making Kin with Trees, a conversation with Solvejg Nitzke. I'm Paul Moss, Executive Director of the Plant Initiative, and I'm very excited to introduce Solvejg and moderator Laura Pustarfi and to start off our 1-hour program. Dr. Solvejg Nitzke is Interim Professor of Comparative Literature at Ruhr University in Bochum, Germany. Her research focuses on the production of knowledge under precarious circumstances. She writes about science fiction, catastrophes, climate change, nature writing, and literary and cultural plant studies. Solvejg's recent publications include Plant Poetics, Literary Forms and Functions of the Vegetal, edited with Yoella Jacobs and Isabel Krantz, Making Kin with Trees, A Cultural Poetics of Interspecies Care, and her nature writing monograph, The Elegance of Ferns, Portrait of a Botanical Marvel, translated by Helga Dasher, which will be published soon by Greystone Books on March 24th. Moderator Dr. Laura Pustarfi is a lecturer in ecology, spirituality, and religion at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and she's executive director of the Certificates and Continuing Education, also at CIIS. Laura's scholarly work examines trees and plants in Western thought, with particular focus on an arboreal and vegetal ontology, and ethics that respects plants themselves. She is co-editor with Dr. David Macaulay of the recent volume, The Wisdom of Trees, Thinking Through Arboreality, and is an associate editor of the Plant Perspectives Journal. Laura is also a board member of the Plant Initiative. The program today will start with 30 minutes of discussion between Solvejg and Laura. For the remainder of the program, Solvejg will be responding to questions posed by you, the attendees, that will be presented by Laura as selected from questions that are posted in the Zoom chat. So we encourage you to please suggest a question for Solvejg to discuss by posting it in the chat at any time, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. This program is being recorded and will be posted online on the Plant Initiative's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording will be sent to everyone who registered. With that, I'm turning over the program to Laura.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you especially to you, Solvejg. Just as we get started, I'm joining you here from the North Bay near San Francisco, California, and I want to acknowledge that's Indigenous Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok territory, recognized as the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria. And we're here today to speak about your new book, Solvejg, Making Kin with Trees, and to talk a lot about trees. But I also want to note that you also have a recent book in German focused on trees, and then Paul mentioned your book on ferns that is very exciting as well. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here, and hi to all.
So this book, Making Kin with Trees, is focused on human care, concern, I would actually say attention towards trees as expressed in literature, and you expand that definition of literature. Can you tell us about how you became interested in trees initially?
Yeah, well, I've been asking myself that same question. I guess I've always been interested in trees, as in I've always been interacting with trees. I always had a favorite tree, and like not just a tree species, but like a particular tree. The first one was a horse chestnut that I was drawn to and played with as a kid, and so. But I never really thought about them as a research topic until I was actually dealing with, and bear with me, Austrian village stories, because I needed like a proper subject for my second book in Germany, and because I don't do proper, I found something weird, in the best way possible. And the Austrian village stories deal a lot with the forest. And I came to think about the difference between the forest and the trees, and how we address those differently on a literary level, one in the background, more of one as like individuals and stuff like that. And then a friend of mine actually posted on Facebook on some weird unrelated thing that we should do something with literature and trees. And like within seconds, I saw myself answering, yeah, you could do that, but not without me. And at that point, I wasn't in it. And from there, it has just been like a constant flow of me buying tree books and meeting trees and, being drawn in. It has turned into a kind of obsession, but luckily I have a job where we turn obsessions into research interests. And then I was lucky enough to be in Dresden, where I'm speaking from now, and the Hygiene Museum or Hygiene Museum here, which is a museum of humans. The Museum of the Human, it is called. They had an exhibit on plants and people, and had just heard in 2019 that was about the Literary and Cultural Plant Studies Network led by Isabel Kranz and Joella Jacobs. And so I thought, as a new member of the team here, I was like, wow, that would be a great idea to have like an international conference. And just wrote an email to Joella and Isabel. Isabel I already knew. And from there, it really took off because working in plants, most of you might know this, is just a great opportunity to meet the best people in academia and beyond. And so that's why I stayed.
Thank you for sharing that and sharing about the horse chestnut. And maybe we'll get a chance to get into trees and forests a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I see that Yoela is with us, so thank you for joining as well. Just want to do a shout out there also. And so in the book, you talk about that you started looking at trees in more detail after reading about trees and the importance of books to your relationship to trees. And can you share more about how this unfolded for you and which books and which trees inspired you?
Yeah. I mean, what you're referring to is that my book tries to find out about the kind of um, practices of how people relate to trees. And one of the things I want to challenge with the book is this idea that there is this kind of authentic, direct way of experiencing this thing we might call nature, and that this is a more valued or even better way of experiencing nature as all the kinds of mediated ways that we have. Because I think it's my experience, but it's also something that I found in many of the texts that I read for the book, that this kind of mediation through maybe poetry or prose narratives or mythical stories or any kind of writing about trees is in a way teaching us to look and to pay attention. You said yourself in the first question, to pay attention to trees and the way in which language fails to accommodate trees is what got me interested. And one of the first books I read about trees specifically, so there were two that really impressed me. The first one was Fiona Stafford's The Long, Long Life of Trees. I just picked that up because I found the cover so nice. And there's something that happens a lot with plant literature. And she's a literary scholar, I don't know, Oxford or Cambridge, anyway, from Great Britain. And she visited different tree species and individual trees and collected botanical information or dendrological information and cultural information at the same time. And that is what really fascinated me. And then I read Wildwood by Roger Deakin, and that drew me in so quickly. Such a good storyteller and such a good teller of this physical relationship to trees, but also he annoyed me so much because Roger Deakin is like the kind of nature writer of like really living outside and doing the whole Thoreau thing and being able to like take his little knife and make his own spoons from wood he found somewhere. And I'm not an outdoorsy person, and I wanted to find out. So it's also kind of a moment of annoyance, but I hope I turned this into a productive thing, where I wanted to figure out if there is a way of, even as a city person, even as a book person, to have a real relationship to trees. And I think that is both possible and impossible. But I do think that by not giving into this idea that there is a more direct, authentic relationship to plants that is preferable to all kind of intellectual ways, we also have like an epistemic way, so a way of conceptualizing and thinking about trees that makes it more accessible for more people. Or in other words, you're not lost if you only discover how great trees are when you lived in a city for 30 years.
I think that's so important to bring out the different relationships that are
Yeah.
possible with trees. And I think your book does that very well. And of course,
Thank
this
you.
has changed a little bit with digital books and with audiobooks, but books themselves are the paper is made from tree pulp often. And so there's a relationship there with the body of the tree and the book itself. So I think that also is possible. And I appreciate how you bring that out even more in your book. Uh, so, in terms of the kind of arc of the book itself, can you explain for those who are not familiar? I'm not a literary scholar myself either. What you mean by arboreal poetics and how arboreal poetics relates to the idea of interspecies care that you develop?
I mean, good thing for me is that you couldn't be familiar with arboreal poetics except if you read my work because I made that term up. Um, but it comes from, or it is one of the attempts in literary and cultural plant studies to find a way of describing the effects different plants have on ways of writing literary texts in the first place. But the subtitle of my book has cultural poetics in it. So I'm looking at the ways in which contact with trees, interest, attention for trees shapes the way cultural relationships unfold. So the idea is to take poetics, which is like in a very simplified ways, the rules which literary texts follow in order, for example, to become a sonnet. You need a poetics, a book where you can look what a sonnet looks like, and then you know what you have to do, and you can write a sonnet. And in modern literature, this poetics is not external to the text anymore. So you don't have a rule book anymore in which you look, is this a sonnet? And then you write it, and then you can also judge it. But you make up your own rules and your own values, yeah, from which you're judged. And I look at texts in order to not commit the fallacy to have to judge myself, or I mean, I do that after a while, but whether a tree text is a good tree text or a bad tree text. And what I do is to look at how a specific text engages with treeness or arborealness beyond the simplified symbolism. So it's not enough for me. I mean, of course, that's the first place I look. A lot of books, if you think of Emanuele Coccia, for example, and now I have all three titles: The Life of Plants, La Vie des Plantes. Yeah. In German, it's Die Philosophie der Pflanzen, the philosophy of plants. It needs to be heavy in German. Anyway, he structures this book with the plant parts. So there is a flower part, a leaf part, a stem part, and a roots part. And that is like the easiest way of taking a tree in order to structure your text. But it's interesting if you start looking at trees, and I love doing that with students. It's like, so what's the problem if you take a tree and you think it grows from the roots? And then I let them hang a little bit until most of the time, some of the students say, but don't trees grow in all directions at once? And I'm like, yes. So what does that do to a text, for example? What if you think of all the different ways in which a tree can grow? And if you look, for example, at Annie Proulx's novel Barkskins, I spend tons of time and tons of like weird, you can think of me of like these crazy board people with like the red string on a board trying to figure out how that works. Barkskins by Annie Proulx has both the idea of a family tree, a linear thing organizing families and genealogies, and the lateral tree ring growth, and then all kinds of ways in which she uses ideas of arboreal time, so how trees relate differently to time and to soil and to kinship, in order to structure a book, which, to be honest, makes the book very long and very technical in some respects. But also, I think that, for example, emulates the tempo of a tree, which is difficult for me to read, to be honest. But that's the kind of stuff I look at. And with the nonfiction I look at in Making Kin with Trees, it means how people take cues, especially in texts that are not on the surface level literary, so that usually don't experiment with form so much. And I still look how people depict the ways in which they themselves claim, especially when they're scientists, that trees kind of force them to find different ways of expressing themselves, how the ways that they have learned how to express scientific fact doesn't fit what they find with trees anymore. And this is one of the ways in which trees, and I give them the benefit of the doubt, why don't imbue them with some agency, in which trees force people to change the ways in which they write their stories.
That's such an important insight. I've certainly found that too in my reading, and the ways that trees impact us as humans.
Mm-hmm.
And that you actually are leading directly to my next question in terms of with the way that in Making Kin with Trees, you've expanded your literary analysis to these mostly popular science books, but also philosophy. And I mean, Peter Wohleben's Hidden Life of Trees or Suzanne Samar's Finding the Mother Tree are just some examples. But I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about that and what kind of inspired you in terms of looking at science and science books as literary and narrative texts?
Mm. I mean, one of the answers is because I'm obnoxious in the way that I am not willing to limit my idea of what literature is, especially not like literature with a capital L and all those kind of forms. I read this and I like it, and but I wouldn't want to limit myself to that. So even when I started out studying comparative literature, my motivation was I kind of tried to trick the university system, because I saw the list of all the things you could study and I wanted to do all of it. And I was like, well, I'm super smart. I study literature because there is a novel about anything. And I kind of was right. And I still do this. So I wrote about physics and I wrote about climate and all kinds of things, and that led me to learn different things. But especially when it comes to plants, even the fiction is not enough. And I am interested in mythological ways of telling stories. So I've never really just looked at literary texts, and I've annoyed supervisor after supervisor by not making this distinction between like a primary and a secondary text. I switch them around, read one through the other. So this is kind of my anti-methodology that becomes visible in this book. And now I may make it a point to do that on purpose. But what is also interesting is that trees aren't any kind of topic. I mean, the first text I wrote about trees was the intro to a collected volume, and I started with forest fires. And the second time I wrote about trees, there was another big forest fire, and I was like, ah, oh, isn't it cheesy if I always, refer to this? And by now, to 2026, so 7, 8 years later, I think I cannot not talk about this. And so it becomes political, the kinds of texts I choose. And not only do many, many literary texts refer to not only Peter Wohlleben and Suzanne Simard, but you might also know Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life is like a very prolifically cited source for literary texts. So of course I have to look at those. And when I looked at those, I found out that most of the texts, if you didn't know, if you didn't have the paratext tell you this is fiction, this is nonfiction, they're not as different as you might think. And what interests me is, so I'm sorry, this could go on and on. I find it so interesting. I do think that when it comes to trees, similar things happen to all who want to write about them. But with the different, well, call to attention and claim on talking about reality that, for example, a forest ecologist like Suzanne Simard has. I mean, she writes this as a professor of forest ecology, and the book is marketed as such. It is at least half memoir, but it is also working with her authority as a scientist and just a hint to the current situation in which facts are not as secure and trust in science is not as big as we might hope it would be. It is especially important to look at the ways in which people tell stories. Not to say that if someone like Suzanne Simard talks about mother trees and like family relationships to trees, or Peter Wohlim, who has often been accused of anthropomorphism, which is not an accusation because duh, of course he does that and he knows it. But what actually does that do? And I'm intrigued by the idea of using my skill set that I have developed with literary texts and see what stories we are told and how we can read them in a way that basically makes politically responsible decisions possible. Because I don't think it's bad to use fiction and literary narratives and rhetorics and stuff like that. That doesn't take away from the science, but it's interesting to see how, for example, I'm still dreaming of like authors teams, like one poet, one literary scholar, one forest ecologist, all working together writing one of these texts. So I thought it might be time, and this is what I try with the book, to offer like a cultural critique of the kind of tree writing that is out there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I love that idea of collaborative writing and it is also breaking down those disciplinary barriers in the way that those of us who write about trees are working towards something that has to do with protecting real trees out there in the
Yeah.
world as well and having those relationships. So, yeah.
I mean, if I would keep to those barriers, I could write about trees as metaphors and symbols and motifs, maybe as themes, and that's it. I would never
Mm-hmm.
encounter an actual tree in a text if I weren't to step over those boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that so much. And my next question is going to take us in a little different direction,
Yeah.
because one of the things that you discuss in your book is feminism and the stories, and especially women's stories, and who gets to create knowledge, as you were just talking about political themes as well. And I'm just curious if you could say more about your thinking on this. And in the book, you share a little bit about your own story, and please feel free if you'd like to share a bit more personally as well.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't set out to write a feminist tree book. I wasn't surprised that most of the books I collected over the years were written by women. Um, and I don't want to make a binary distinction between tree books by men and tree books by women. I could at this point, but I won't. But there is a particular genre that caught my interest, and I call it autodendrobiography or dendroautobiography. I have both terms in there. So there is a genre basically, or a type of tree book in which people imagine the biography of trees, or like an autobiography of trees, speak in the voice of the tree. There's also, and that is the more interesting to me at this point, where scientists tell their own story through their tree research and through their relationship through to trees. Suzanne Simard, I have already mentioned. Hope Yaren's Lab Girl might be a book that many people have read. And I'm really interested because trees, even more than if you were like an astrophysicist, require you to justify, to situate yourself, to justify yourself and to situate yourself. Because sometimes working about trees elicits feelings in people. And scientists are not supposed to have feelings. Women have too many feelings, and I'm, of course, being ironic here. But when that comes together, a lot of those books spend as much time on relaying how they manage being a human, being a caring human, having, for example, responsibilities as a parent, and how their research on trees, especially as trees as more than oxygen producing machines, um, hangs together, or yeah, sticks together with those things. And I found that a lot of the experiences that the scientists make, and I mean, I say that as someone who's situated in the kind of comfortable realms of the humanities in comparison to the so-called hard sciences. So it's I don't want to say easier, but it's different. We're more non-men in the humanities than in many of the sciences. So I'm babbling, but what I found is that many of the questions of how do I lay claim to being a serious scholar, that the things that I write are not silly because they make visible that I'm a human, but that on the other hand, I need to make visible that I'm a human with all the biases that come with that in order to be able to take trees seriously. So I take trees seriously and expect people to take me seriously. And in the process, I find out, like Hope Yarn, like Susan Simard, like Monica Galliano, that people don't take me seriously and don't take trees seriously, and how to navigate that and how to lay claim to like actually talk about facts is something that I found out. And they're really like interesting anecdotes in those books of how, for example, Suzanne Sommer, just because I mentioned her a million times already, needed to learn how to do um, public science because no one would listen to her in her field, and kept telling her it's not because you're a woman and it's not because you're the only woman, it's just because everything you write is stupid and emotional. um, that has nothing to do with misogyny. So she kind of needed to find a way of appealing to people and actually talking to them, and do that. And that is something I share, not in the extreme that she describes, but I've made or had the experience that it is so much easier for me to talk, for example, at a children's university or with like just interested people who come to a public science event at a botanical garden or something and ask me as someone they know I've read many books, so I might know something, and then ask me things to take me seriously and that. And as soon as I take this and go be a literary scholar, especially like a Germanistin, so German literary scholar, and say things about like, so as I just did, I just imbue trees with agency. I regard them as living beings with a form of intent that I might not be able to describe, but that I can clearly see. And then people smile at me a little funny and go like, "Oh, that is interesting. Thanks for bringing up these cute facts about trees." And yeah, well, working with that is something that has also become personal, but not only for me. And I really thought a lot about this, like how to bring myself into this, because that's not something I mean, we all have learned differently. And as I said, German context is a little different. Still, even saying I was requiring some, it felt like bravery. Um, but then I could not say this because a lot of those things I read during COVID and during all the kinds of things that came together with that. Um, and I wondered, it's like, how can we take seriously a being that is so fundamentally different to us when we can't do this amongst ourselves? And it sounds like a cliche, but some of the cliches are cliches because we encounter them so often.
Thank you for speaking to that, and I certainly share the desire to be taken seriously and to
Yeah.
be taken seriously in the things that in the ways that I'm talking about trees as well. So thank you for speaking to that and bringing out this thread. And as narratives shift, especially academic narratives shift, there is more openness to that. But and yes, adding in I into to an academic text, I like the way that you said that. It's a bit of a risk, but I think it's a risk worth taking. So I'm glad you did. Yeah. Uh, I'm actually going to ask about a couple of things here. So
Yeah.
one of the key themes in your book is your pride in taking on the tree hugger, being a tree hugger, and I appreciate this. So I'm curious why tree hugging is so important, but then you also talk about how it's the process of making kin can be frustrating, and so I'm curious why tree hugging is so important, and then how to overcome the challenges of making kin with trees, especially as we're taking trees seriously in this
Mhm.
context. So I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, all of the things. Um, so tree hugging became important to me because I have been asked a couple of times in this wonderful way that maybe not only, but academics do especially well. So I presented my research and did all this stuff and, you know, took notice of the fact that it might be important, even for literary scholar, to contribute to questions of environmental politics and protection of trees and forests and how we can do that. And someone looked at me very seriously and asked me, so how do you prevent coming across as a tree hugger? And I knew what this question was. This is one of those loaded questions that, especially if you're still like an upcoming, not fully established scholar, could make or break you. So I gave the smart answer of like how I'm interested in the epistemology, blah, 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 blah. It's all in the book. And this is all true, but I kept coming back to that and I had been asked this question in all kinds of different ways or overheard people saying like, what business do literary scholars have in like ecology? And does this person think she can save the world with this? All these kinds of ironies. And it actually hurt me as a person because I was like, why wouldn't I be? Why have you seen trees? I mean, have you seen trees? Why wouldn't you be a tree hugger? And then I looked into what a tree hugger is, and tree huggers, the original ones, and I forgot the year, but I think it was in 17th century in India, people put their body between axes and trees to protect trees. This is what tree huggers do. It's not like there's just this hippy dippy thing of preferring trees to people, which I mean, there are good reasons for. But most people working on plants and trees are not working for the protection of plants and trees in order to make it harder for humans. Quite the opposite. So it is important to me because it's a shortcut to saying I have feelings for trees. I have strong feelings for trees. And this is also leading to the frustrating parts because Sumana Roy said it in her book, How I Became a Tree. To be, what is it? To love a tree is to be a permanently exiled lover. And that is so true because I have not found a way of how to overcome the difficulties of making kin with trees. But to be honest, I haven't overcome the problems of making kin with other humans. So to take trees seriously might mean, and I argue for that, that we will not solve this problem in a manner that it's done, that we have like a 10 steps of making kin with trees and then it's fine. But that we need to find ways of trying and failing and trying again. Because in the course of the book, working with Maria Puig de la Bella Casa's ideas of care, I came to the point where I was like, what if the tree doesn't want me to hug it and can't tell me? Oh God, I'm like, ugh, what a terrible idea. And then I had to laugh about myself, and that is how I deal with this. Because I think it's important to find a way, and that again plays into this being taken seriously or not. Um, in order to make kin with trees, we need to put in a lot of work of getting to know someone who won't tell us about themselves in a language that we are used to. So we need to read tons of things and talk a lot and like find out things and visit trees every day, all the things. But we also need to be willing to make a fool out of ourselves, to become a little bit of the newer version of the tree hugger. So I take students, for example, to sit under trees and we read tree poems. Thinking with Trees by Jason Allen Payson, by the way, big tip, beautiful poems. And it's annoying to do that because you're not in a classroom. Everything's a little weird to sit, and then the needles of the trees rain down on you, and everything's a little bit disruptive. But you need to address the tree all the time because it's interfering with what you do. Or I found tons of artists who do like plainly ridiculous things to try to find a language that is not the way in which we usually address trees to get close to those. And that is, I'm actually arguing for like more fun with trees. It doesn't sound that serious, but it's not. It's if we only see trees as numbers and the deterioration of ecosystems and all that kind of stuff, that's not how we make relationships. Like telling the stories, making a fool of ourselves, and like getting a little bit away from thinking of ourselves as a center, not only of attention and knowledge making, but also of interpretive power and like maybe, I don't know, give a tree a gift some point. And that doesn't solve the problems, but relationships usually never do that. So I think it's a sign of a ongoing relationship that you fight and are frustrated and then find a way of getting together again. Yeah. See, I am a tree hugger. I'm really like doing the whole whole deal.
And I think that idea of reclaiming tree hugging brings us all the way back to attention and to as you were just saying, really making kin, that it's that ongoing relationship and being with trees, being in conversation through books, through literature, through various methods. Gifts, as you said, maybe giving some water to a tree, something like that, and creating that relationship
Touching the
over time.
bark. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
touching the bark and learning the differences. And I mean, attention is all that matters. You will not be able to protest a tree falling if you don't even notice that the tree is there. And I mean,
Yeah.
I know that Plant Initiative is doing a lot of that work, and I think that is so important to just, I mean, even if you just stand there and like, have you ever looked at that tree? And you stand there with your friend and look at it. It's more than one would think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, I agree. I agree. And I might suggest everyone who's in the audience or listening to this later, go out and look at a tree.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we have some questions
Thank
from the
you.
audience. So we have some time to take some questions. Um, and please feel free to put more questions in the chat if you have them. So our first question is from Scott, and Scott asks, what extent did you incorporate any of Michael Marder's work into your book?
I mean, it's central. The whole idea of taking plants seriously and acknowledging their difference is basically my rundown way of putting together what Michael does. Michael Marder's plant philosophy is, or the anti-metaphysical approach to plants is guiding the ways in which I look at plants. And to be honest, it has been more important than some of the dendrology work that I've been reading, because it really deals with the fact like, how can we make room in the world for a being with rights and with claims to not only land, but also atmosphere and all of the things that lives in a completely different temporality than we do. And we need to make space, and we need to make room for the fact that we will never fully comprehend it, and how that also helps not committing the fallacy of thinking we ever comprehend anyone enough to speak for them. So this has been the most important part. And it also has been the part that was the biggest challenge for me, because I'm not a philosopher, and to really working through how Michael spirals around plants and all the different references, and it needed a lot talking about the pushing the boundaries of the disciplines. I needed to talk to a lot of philosophers to ask me, so do you do this in philosophy? Is this normal, or does it happen because of plants? And had the pleasure of meeting Michael at several occasions, and also ask him stuff and tell him about my stuff. So again, working with plant people is a big pleasure, because everyone's so generous, and I think that's something we can learn, or we do learn, from plants.
Yes, and he's so prolific in his writing and thinking about plants in particular. So yes, um, understandable. Um, we have another question from Jen Ellen, and they have been offering workshops asking folks to hug trees, city trees, and then asking about the experience. Tree hugging as activism is an interesting point they bring up. And they also bring up Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, which you also discuss in the book,
Hmm.
and Kimmerer's discussion of the grammar of animacy. And so the question is if you could talk more in relation to that, and then also the critiques of anthropomorphism.
Yeah. So yay to the workshops. I've been teaching my students how to hug trees, and of course, there is no one way of doing that. So Kimra is so interesting for me because this idea of braiding the different strands of knowledge making, in her case, in braiding sweetgrass from indigenous knowledge, knowledge as a mother, as a carer, and knowledge as a botany professor. This idea of braiding is super important for me because I propose that we work on new mythologies, so of ways of keeping this knowledge alive, of how to relate to trees. The grammar of intimacy is interesting for me as a comparative literature scholar and as someone whose first language is German, because a lot of the things she says, German does already. She says, if we would talk about trees as he or she, we wouldn't do those things. And I'm like, oh, well, we would, because German does that. In German, an oak is a she and not an it. And it's interesting to see, not just say that it doesn't work what she does, but that we can take this and even go further and not only say or use different pronouns for trees, for example, but to develop a grammar of intimacy that knows of itself as such. So I would say that to strengthen Kimura's point, the grammar of intimacy is something that needs poetic, and of course I would say that, but needs poetic knowledge as well, because it needs to be aware of itself as a language that does things. So we need to take language, and that is what she does. Need to take language and need to take trees out of their utilitarian or a purely instrumental function that they often have for us. So I can work with that, especially because I stumbled across a couple of points. And she's also one of the scientists who had to deal with this question of being taken seriously and needing to claim a point from which she can, lay claim to producing knowledge, and thus informs my feminism as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I wonder if you might also want to address the question about critiques of anthropomorphism, and
Oh yeah.
especially with
Oh yeah.
Bolim's work.
Sorry, I forgot that. Oh, that's my favorite part. So there is this brilliant article on Peter Wohleben's anthropomorphism by Johannes Wankhammer, a colleague who read this and said, well, so there's this huge wave of tree scientists denouncing Peter Wohleben because of anthropomorphism. And Johannes shows that the problem isn't anthropomorphizing. The problem is that people don't differentiate between different ways of doing so. So Robin Wall Kimmerer, for example, does that intentionally. As I said, the language, the grammar of intimacy is aware of itself as a grammar, as of something that language does to trees or invites trees to work with. And I wouldn't say that Peter Wohleben is doing the same thing. You have read the book, you know that I have some reservations, or I'm highly critical of a lot of things he does. I appreciate the attention you brought to trees. But I would say that anthropomorphism and anthropomorphism isn't the problem, anthropocentrism is. And this way of like joking our way out of it, or making ourselves a little bit ridiculous and taking ourselves as humans less serious in favor of trees, might be a way around that. And that is something that I look at in a million texts, so I can't go through all of them. But what I want to say is that it makes sense to look at the way in which people anthropomorphize trees and ask yourself the question whether someone is making themselves into a tree to make themselves bigger, to make themselves like, reach further. Because if you make yourself similar to a tree, that doesn't necessarily mean that you elevate the tree in your language, but it means that you appropriate treeness, basically. And another book that is great on that is Jared Farmer's Elder Flora. It's a history of the care for ancient trees, a very well, a readable book, I want to say. And he's also collecting these kinds of stories and how people turn trees into family, basically, but by becoming a little bit more tree-ish themselves, and trying to negotiate. And to conclude, I don't think we get around this. It is human language, is stuff that we do. But again, being aware of what we do and doing it intentionally, and that is something we can learn not only from plants, but from poets and writers of literary fiction, might at least make more space for trees to be trees and not lesser humans. If that is, I hope that is an answer.
That was, yeah, great. And I also think about it in terms of anthropomorphism, as we are, those of us listening here are situated within the human being, human bodies. And so as we're coming from a human perspective, addressing a tree, can we get out of anthropomorphism? But I appreciated your distinction between anthropomorphism and anthropocentrism in particular, and the ways that sometimes humans want to be more tree-like, and kind of that phytomorphism idea as well, or dendromorphism also. So.
Yeah, I always should have like little pastable text ready, because I always give out like lists of books that you should also read, because if you're ever interested in that kind of phytomorphism, I recommend Algernon Blackwood, The Man Whom the Trees Loved. It's a weird story, so it's not quite fantasy, not quite science fiction, but of a man basically seduced by trees to become a tree and like lose his humanity in the trees. It's a really good story, just if you want to read something more. And I got to, just to bring it back to Making Kin with Trees, I got to recommend that to her name will come to me, the professor who did a meta study on the Wood Wide Web and made this big critique, that the Wood Wide Web isn't as established scientifically as it seemed, because there is a positive citation bias. So people want it to be true so badly that they keep citing it. And
Is it just Justine Karst?
Yeah, Justine Karst. And
yeah, thank
we got to talk about this. Thank
chat.
you. Yeah, thank you. And Justine Karst intervened in some Twitter conversation that I had with someone about Volem. I was like, no, I'm on your side. I'm not doing this. And I recommended Algernon Blackwood to her. And I was like, this is what I mean. And she was like, yeah, that is so much better, because it's weird. It gets to be weird. It doesn't have to be fact or fiction or truth or lie or something made up or something real. It can uneasily sit in between all those things. And that's what I think is important with this. I hope that addresses some of the questions with the art and artists that I saw.
So our next question is from Nesrin, and Nesrin talks about Gaston Bachelard, who characterizes the imagination as a cosmological tree. And they mention a vertical force that anchors the dreamer in the subterranean subconscious while reaching toward the aerial heights of reverie. So they ask, what are your thoughts on this model of imagination as an integrative vertical axis between memory and life?
Yeah, my first thought is that Emanuele Coccia should have cited this, because it sounds very familiar, and I think there is a lot of resonance between those two ideas. I'm not the biggest fan of this vertical axis idea, except if you use the medieval idea of turning it round and understanding humans as upside down trees, because then you don't have just one tree that is a symbol and that just takes a form, which is, by the way, the kind of tree that Deleuze and Guattari criticize in this famous rhizome text. So you don't have this idea of like this one big trunk and then things going in all directions, because we have a sycamore tree out here on the meadows of the River Elbe that grows by itself and no one comes and cuts it. It basically looks like a giant shrub. So again, if you look at trees, I don't find this axis idea too convincing, because if you let trees, they will grow in all directions, all at once, everywhere. So I don't think that this kind of rigidness that this order can have matches the plant being so much as the symbol of order that people want to do with trees. I mean, it's not wrong. It's not in a tree. But just to, I mean, I would have to need to read this and go through this, but this is one of the things that I encounter a lot, where the tree is reduced to a form that is convenient to humans, both in a metaphorical, symbolical, and in a material way. And I mean, Bachelard wouldn't be the first or the last philosopher or French philosopher to do that. So, but I like this idea of connection. If you have this idea, and I mean, the cosmological tree, of course, also refers to Yggdrasil from Norse mythology, where all
Yeah.
the worlds, and the plural is so important, all the worlds are contained in this tree and connected through it. So this is where I would say the arboreal poetics works, and the rigidness and the axis, keeping things connecting and keeping things separate, not so much maybe. Then I'm aware that this is simplified and I didn't read the text before I said this. Just
And
for you to take me seriously.
I appreciate what you're bringing out between the metaphorical trees and the trees themselves as well. And even Plato talks about humans as upside down trees with roots in
Yeah.
the heavens. And Jung talks about the tree as cosmological axis as well. So it's
I
a
absolutely sneak
common
my way
metaphor.
around all the young trees, and I will pretend they don't exist.
So yeah, I think we could talk about this topic by
Yeah.
itself for quite a long time as well, in terms of the imaginative metaphors and then the trees themselves, the tree that stands there and that we approach and
Never
we
grows the way you
encounter.
plan for it to do it.
So I think we might have time for one more question. We'll see what we can get through. So we have someone who asked about as an artist, how they, as an artist, can take the art of trees as necessary, and how you've maybe researched the art of trees as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the ways in which artists can deal with that and do deal with that is being aware of the fact that a tree is not a thing. A tree is that is one of my favorite things that I found, and it also refers to the question about non-tree plant life and other life. Tree is an aesthetic concept. It's not a botanical concept. Tree is the habit of certain plants to grow in tree form. And you can tell that, for example, by looking at a hazelnut, which will grow into a tree shape or a shrub shape, depending on the environment it grows in. And this at the fundamental connectedness of trees to their environments. And this is what we can learn with Michael Mada, that I mean, the fact that I talk about trees as if I could differentiate them from anything else is an effect of human language. And to explore ways in which we address this connectedness and the fact that there are oaks and there are plane trees and there are sycamores and there are beech trees and there are all kinds of trees, but there is not the tree. And to kind of sneak through this human, yeah, well, Goethe would say Formtrieb, so this human will to have a form and well, order all the things in that box. That is something that art really is great at, like challenging, addressing, and then kind of sneaking around it and still ask people to fill this, because in art it's not a problem. If you say a tree, everybody gets to fill in what that means, and then you can go through it and paint it or do it. And I've worked through many texts where people consider what drawing or writing or performing a tree might be, and what it means. And artists are privileged in that failure is not a problem. Failure doesn't prevent you from working. And the failure of understanding what trees are and how they are not one, but many, and in so many directions at once, I think is the greatest potential of it. But I also think it's important, and that goes back to being like a scholar. I wrote this book as a scholar. Still, I'm not writing this as a poet, and it's not even the Fern book led me more towards like creative writing. I'm not fully there yet, but entered that terrain. But writing this as a scholar also, I would say, imbues me with the kind of authority, but also with the responsibility to say, art is so much better at this than most of our non-fictional, non-artistic ways of approaching trees at the moment. And with our, I say, Western, modern, capitalist society, all the things, and getting out of that. But I don't want to say what form that could take, because there is so much amazing stuff, and you begin to see trees in everything and everywhere after a while. And that is my greatest success so far, that people write me emails like, everything's full of them. There's a tree in every book I encounter. Everything is full of trees. How did you do that? They must have been there before, but now I see them everywhere. So that is also what art and talking about trees can do, like make people aware that we don't need to find them or plant them, but that they are there and growing, and we're part of their world. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and as we were talking about attention, art helps us place our attention where it's important, and art about trees helps us to attend more fully to trees or care about trees as well.
Yeah.
I would say also.
Exactly.
Well, I wish we had more time because there's some other great comments and questions in the chat. So thanks to everybody who put in comments around activism or other plants, fungi. Wish we could keep talking, but did you want to give a final word?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, feel free to contact me. It's the good thing about the weird name is that I'm easy to Google, and at Blue Sky and Instagram, and I'm happy to talk more about trees in any way you would like. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for the conversation. Thanks to everyone for coming, and I will pass this back to Paul.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you so much, Solvejg. That was like really great conversation, and you and Laura just really kept things very, very interesting, and also really a big thanks to the audience members for all of your questions, even though we weren't able to get to each of them today. So thank you to everyone. This program has been one of a series of online events from the Plant Initiative about the human-plant connection. And just wanted to mention our next event, which will be on May 19th, and that's the myth of human exceptionalism. And that will feature a conversation with Dr. Christine Webb about her new book, The Arrogant Ape, The Myth of Human Exceptionalism and Why It Matters. And that also has important implications for how humans treat plants. So thanks again to everyone for attending today. And if you'd like to support these types of programs from the Plant Initiative, we're always appreciative of donations through our website at plantinitiative.org. So thanks everyone again for participating, and hope to see you again at a future event.